Hey, Will, how's it going? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty good.
Pretty good?
Yeah. Uh,
You want me to try to put a microphone on in here?
no, it's fine. You're all good.
All right, just want to make sure, man.
Yeah, you're all good. Anyways, episode 8 of the podcast. Today we have 98.5 The Sports Subs, formerly of Sacramento, and current host of the Nick Howell Show and the Locked On Patriots Show. Please welcome today's guest, Nick Hattles. Welcome to the show, Nick. Thank you for
Thanks,
coming
man.
on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on, Nick. Just right away, since we have all the time in the world, first question for you is why did you want to get into sports media and how did it feel going to the sports hub early on in your career?
Yeah, I mean, wanted to get into sports radio because when I was at URI, I had a professor who told me that writing was kind of becoming a thing of the past and that money wasn't going to be great. Opportunity wasn't going to necessarily be out there as it used to be before I got to college. So that kind of got me thinking of doing some radio. And I did some play by play stuff at URI when I was there, and I did a weekly show. And I think my senior year, I did a weekly show on Fridays. I got to cover the 2004 presidential primary, and that kind of got me to fall in love with live radio. So that led to an internship, and then down the road, I got to 98.5 when we launched in 2009 now, and I went there and I was a producer, and then just slowly kind of built my way up doing some part time stuff, and then that led to a full time opportunity down in Virginia. So, kind of a quick synopsis of my beginning and how I got to where I'm at. I began at 790 The Score in Providence with that internship, and then I fell back into radio thanks to a friend who heard about 98.5 and was going to work there, and he helped me get in.
Yeah, for sure. Growing up in Boston, I think you grew up in the New England area. It is definitely exciting to cover Boston sports. Been watching these teams for basically your entire life. One of your big breaks was going from Boston to Sacramento. How did that feel, and how did it go from covering four sports to only covering two teams?
Well, I went from, as I said, I started in '09 with the Sports Hub when we started, and then I was there until 2012, and then pretty much 3 years on the dot. We launched in August of '09, and I got my first full time opportunity in Virginia Beach, and that was in July of 2012. Then I came back up here to work with Jonesy. Then I went back down to Virginia. And then in 2021, I just got an email, random email. Had no idea it was going to be sent. Had no idea I was going to be contacted by somebody in Sacramento all the way across the country. Talked to the wife about it, talked to Kelly about it, and we decided that we'd be open to the idea of going there if it made sense. And they flew us out there. We went out there, and interview went great, and I felt really good about what they had kind of offered me as far as the opportunity, and I had a chance to be the program director. To run the station on a day-to-day basis and host in afternoons, and it's a top 30 market, just outside the top 25, so good size market. And I said yes, and then so went out there, and first year I was the PD, and then the station grew, and because the station grew, they decided that I should have one of the two jobs. And which one did I want? And I said I wanted a host because that's what I truly loved. So after the first year, I was just the afternoon host, and a new PD came in. And so working in Sacramento was interesting because a lot of it was the Kings. Obviously, we had the Kings on our station, so we were the flagship, like 98.5 is for the Bruins, Patriots, and Celtics. So we were the flagship of the Kings. So as program director, I had to work with that organization, and spent a lot of time talking to people within their organization to figure certain things out. And then on the air, you're spending a lot of time talking about the Kings, but you're also talking about some NFL stuff that you can mix in. Generally, like the bigger stories, you're still talking about the big stories. Tom Brady retires. I remember being the PD. We're all over that. We've got a story online, and we got to make sure that we've got some kind of, what are we doing for programming the next day and how we're going to handle that. So you're still talking about the big stuff. And then, for football season, you talked about the 49ers, you talked about the Raiders, because San Francisco, where they play, is about 2 hours, 3 hours, about 2 hours south of where we were. And of course, the Raiders were from Oakland originally. So that's about 90 minutes to 2 hours southwest of Sacramento. So you start talking about, those teams, because there's still fans from those teams in those areas. And the same thing would say for the A's and the Giants, but you didn't talk a ton of baseball because, there's a lot of basketball stuff, summer league stuff, draft stuff, free agency. And you also just find ways to talk about family and, you joke around, you talk about pop culture if you need to. You got to find ways to just create segments. And so that's what you do. That's what you do in the business. So that's what I did out there. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, but it came back. I had to come back due to some family stuff. So unfortunately left Sacramento, and that led me back here.
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting story right there. Going from a great sports city to another great sports city in Sacramento. Craziest story on air, like, you've been in Boston, you've been in Virginia, you've been in California. What has been the craziest sports city? Obviously, the Celtics have won a championship. The Red Sox have won multiple championships in your lifetime. What's been the craziest story, like, on air, while you've been in the radio business?
Well, I think there's different types of crazy, right? So I'll give you some examples. So fun crazy, how am I going to handle this at the start of the show, is when my co-host in Sacramento got stuck in his elevator, and I had to start the show without him. So we actually called him while he was in the elevator, and that was the start of the show, just talking to him while he was stuck in the elevator and busting his balls and having fun with that. So it's kind of like, fun, random crazy. Serious crazy, can't believe this is happening, was I was working for ESPN radio at the time, national, and Kobe Bryant died. And so I was actually hosting ESPN radio when the helicopter went down. And so that was kind of, that was crazy on different levels. It was surreal crazy because we just found out Kobe died. It was crazy because I was telling the whole world literally that Kobe had died. Crazy because of all the behind the scenes stuff that was happening. Like, we didn't know what guests we were getting. The producer's constantly in your ear telling you, we might get this guy, we might get that guy. We had Ramona Shelburne on for an interview, and she literally pulled her car over on the highway to start crying during the interview. So kind of just like, how do you handle something like that crazy? I would say that was another one. Experiencing my first earthquake ever live on the air in Sacramento was kind of crazy when the whole building and studio shook and we were all looking at each other, and my co-host was from Chicago, so he had never experienced it either. So that was also kind of a crazy moment. You've got to be ready. I mean, there's just all these random things, you're on a remote, you're doing a show from somewhere, your connection is not working, so you're off the air, you're trying to get on the air. Engineers are, plugging stuff in, unplugging stuff. So there's just a ton of different examples of crazy in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, certainly, Nick. I mean, like, one story you specifically picked out, definitely Kobe Bryant name. I'm a basketball player. Like, all basketball hoopers know where they were when Kobe passed. That was a very tragic event. Kind of tying into that question is, what has been your favorite Boston sports championship? I'm pretty sure you're a fan of all 4 Boston sports teams. You've seen a lot of titles over the past 20 years. What has been your favorite and why?
It's a tough one. I mean, I think I start with the 01 Patriots, because I was in college at the time, and that was when you felt like, all right, Boston can win championships, like they can get this thing going again. It had been a while. And I think that kind of brought the belief back to the city in New England. I mean, I grew up in Rhode Island for the first 30 plus years of my life. I spent in Rhode Island, lived in Mass since then on a couple of times, lived in Watertown, live in Foxborough right now. So I think that 01 Patriots championship, just because of everything that happened, 9/11, the nature of that season where the Pats were kind of just another team, and then they went on the magical run, and then the magical playoff run with the Raiders game and the kick from Vinatieri and the tuck rule and all that stuff. And then just I remember how people felt going into that game against the Rams. Patriots had no chance. People were like, greatest show on turf they're gonna score 35 points. They're gonna blow them out. So I think that was probably my favorite, just because it was the first time that I was old enough to truly appreciate a team winning a championship. And then you got the '04 Red Sox, which was special because my first love was baseball. And so my father loves baseball, and my Uncle Frankie was a Red Sox fan his entire life, and was one of those guys that lived until his like 80s and never got to see him win. So I think the '04 Red Sox kind of would be that next in line. I'd say it's between those two. The Red Sox is more of a personal kind of pull. The Patriots was more of a like, all right, here we are. Like I get to witness this, and I understand how it feels to be the fan of a championship team in a professional sport.
Yeah, those are two very special championships, especially the '04 Red Sox. Another question to add on to that is the Patriots, or I guess this is kind of different from the questions, but I guess it is continue on the Patriots thing. The schedule did release last week, so a lot of people are predicting a lot of wins because they have a pretty easy schedule. I know who was out on NBC Sports Boston that predicted them to win 13 games. I forgot his name, but like overall, how many wins do you think the Patriots are going to win this year, and do you think they'll make the playoffs?
I think Taylor Kyles had them winning 12. I think they put 13 up there on the board, and you got a little. He said he wasn't that optimistic. I think 12 wins is very optimistic. I think that's shout out to Taylor, smart guy, smart football guy. But I wouldn't touch 12 wins with a 10-foot pole with this team right now. I don't feel nearly confident enough to predict that high of a win total. I don't love let's go through the schedule in May and go through wins and losses, because there's just so much stuff that can happen. But I will generally say that, looking at the schedule, it's a great layout for them, Will. You look at the beginning of the season, I think it's 3 out of their first 4 games are at home. You've got the stretch where, in the middle of the season where you're going against a number of rookie quarterbacks, young quarterbacks. I think their defense could do damage there. And even at the end of the schedule, I know you've got Buffalo and you've got Baltimore, 2 very tough teams back-to-back weeks. But you have a bye week right before Buffalo, which I think helps. The Buffalo game's at home, which I think helps. Baltimore is going to be very tough, no doubt. But, you've got the Giants, you've got the Jets, and then you've got the Dolphins at Gillette Stadium in January. And we all know that Tua and Mike McDaniel have both been terrible in cold weather. So I even think that the end of the schedule, they could go 3-2. And if they could somehow find a way to split that Buffalo-Baltimore back-to-back, if they could win one of those 2 games, they could finish 4-1 on the season over their final 5. So you kind of look at the soft middle. You look at the 3 3 out of the first 4 games at home. If they go 3-2 to end the year and they end up losing both to Buffalo and Baltimore, I could see them right around 10 wins. I think, if they go 4-1 in that final 5, I wouldn't be shocked if they're at 10 wins. But I also think, the floor, if you're asking me what I think the floor is, I think it's right around 8. I'd be surprised if they won 7 or fewer games in 2025.
I'm personally a Giants fan, so obviously I watch the Patriots because I'm from the New England area, but I am a Giants fan. But Patriots schedule does look pretty good for them, at least at the moment. The NFL can change at any moment and at any time. Bit of a Celtics question right here. They just had one of the most insane eliminations ever. First he got blowing 2 straight 20-point leads, then he got Jason Tatum going down, and then he had that embarrassment that was last Friday. What do the Celtics do next, and how will the Celtics play without Tatum for the first part of next year? And will they make any acquisitions in the offseason?
They're going to make acquisitions. I think there's going to be a lot of change. And I thought there was going to be some change before the Tatum injury. I had been saying, that in the next 12, 18 months, Porzingis or Holiday would be gone. I think they've got to get under that second apron. So because of the CBA. So I think they were going to deal one of those two guys no matter what. I think the Tatum injury gives it more urgency because now this is kind of an opportunity to maybe get under the luxury tax threshold. And to get under that, they've got to trade. They've got to trim about $40 million in payroll to get under the luxury tax line. If you get under that, Will, I'm sure you know a lot of this. There's a lot of things that you can do differently to build your basketball team. If you're stuck in the second apron, you can't combine contracts and ship them out for one player. You've got some draft pick penalties that you're dealing with. You can't use the mid-level exception. There are all these different kinds of things that you can't do to build your team. So they want to get out of that second apron. If you get under the luxury tax, there's even more that you can do to build your team out. So I think, number one, I think they're going to try to trade Porzingis. He's on an expiring contract. You might be able to get some value from him. I think they're going to want to trade Jrue Holiday. I don't know if they're going to be able to trade Jrue Holiday. It looks like, he's on the back nine for sure. He's going to be 35 in June. And he certainly looked like he was declining this year compared to what he looked like last season. And he's got 3 years left on his contract if you include the player option. So, I don't know if there's going to be teams clamoring for Jrue Holiday. So the issue, Will, is that I'm sure that Brad Stevens would love to trade Porzingis, Holiday, keep White, keep Brown, and say, all right, let's get under that luxury tax. Let's try to get a pick or two, and let's see what we can get. Maybe trading Sam Hauser, you can get another piece. So I think that's what he would love to do. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it because I don't know how valuable Porzingis is right now since he played 42 games this year and he has that mystery illness. And he's got his injury history. So I don't know if they're going to have to give up assets to trade him, which they might. You see that all the time, right? Like they might have to trade a first-round pick with Porzingis just to get rid of his contract. Does Stevens want to do that? I don't know. It might depend on what's coming back. Holiday is even more difficult. I mean, you might have to deal multiple picks or a young player or a pick and a player with Holiday to try to get rid of that contract. I don't think Stevens is going to want to do that. So then you get to Jaylen Brown and Derek White. Those guys are the two most valuable pieces that you have that you can trade. Brown, I think, would get you the biggest return. I think Derek White is right behind that. If I were Stevens, I wouldn't proactively try to trade those guys. I'd start with Porzingis and Holiday. And if I'm having trouble and it's too much to give up to get rid of those contracts, then I might see if a team is willing to overpay for one of those two other guys. I wouldn't trade them unless it was the type of trade that would, knock me back to the floor. I would have to get a significant amount in return for Brown or White. So I think that's kind of where they start off. I think I don't think Horford comes back. If Tatum was healthy, I think Horford would come back. I don't think he's going to come back after this past season and after seeing Tatum go down. So I don't think he returns. They've got to re-sign Kornet. We'll see if they can get that done. So there's going to be a lot of movement. They've got two picks. They've got the 28th pick and the 32nd pick in the draft. Do they try to move those both and try to move up a couple of slots? Do they try to move a player along with those picks to try to get a top 15 pick to maybe try to get a young guy who might be capable of starting right away? There's a lot of questions that have to be answered. And it all begins with Tatum. It's Noah Dalzell at Celtics blog. She wrote a fantastic article over the last few days. She spoke to an Achilles surgeon, and he sounded pretty optimistic about Tatum's ability to get back on the floor within the next year. And he feels optimistic about that because Tatum's 27. He's a wing. And if you look at the history, wing position players usually come back from the Achilles better than bigger guys, for example. And he also said that the surgery time that Tatum got the surgery within 12 hours of the injury. And according to the surgeon, when you're dealing with the Achilles, the faster you can get the surgery done, the better. So the fact that Tatum got the surgery done within like the first 12 hours because he happened to injure it in New York City, and they happened to have a top surgeon that was like within miles from him, they were able to get that surgery done quickly, and there were no complications from the surgery, which is also something that happens at times with that injury. So we don't know. I mean, everybody's body handles it differently. We have no idea. It could take Tatum a year and a half, like Durant. It could take Tatum 7 or 8 months, like Dominique Wilkins, Wesley Matthews. We have no idea. But, reading what the surgeon had to say make me feel at least somewhat better about Tatum's ability to be back, if not by the end of next season, then absolutely back and ready to go by, 26, 27.
Yeah, for sure, Nick. Obviously Kevin Durant came back and recovered from that torn Achilles pretty well. Anyways, the main Boston sports story of today, or probably going to be for at least the next week, is Don Sweeney getting extended. I found out about this news in school. Personally, I'm not the biggest Bruins fan. It goes Giants, then Celtics, and like Portuguese national team, Red Sox. Bruins, like all those teams. So I'm not the biggest Bruins fan out there, but I like playoff hockey. But when I heard this news for the first time today around 10 a.m., I was very confused by it because the Bruins just had their worst season in a very long time. And, Don Sweeney is not a perfect GM. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how disappointed are you with owner Jeremy Jacobs? And what do you think the Bruins will do for the next offseason?
Well, it's going to be a lot of change with the Bruins, too. They got about, I think, $28 million in cap space at their disposal. They got a bunch of guys who are walking into free agency. They have Geeky, who is going to be a restricted free agent. I would imagine they want to try to re-sign him after the season he just had. So they've got a lot of work to do just from a team building standpoint, first and foremost. It all starts with the coach. And Will, I think that's the problem. I think it's very tough to go out and hire a head coach when your GM has 1 year left on his contract. Because if you're a guy that's looking to get hired, you want to make sure that the person hiring you has job security. You want to make sure that the GM that brings you in is going to be there in future years. Because if you get brought in by somebody who gets fired within the first 365 days of your tenure, now you've got a new GM coming in. You're not that new GM's guy. The new GM is going to want to hire his guy to be the head coach. So my suspicion, Will, is that the Bruins were having a lot of trouble trying to get a head coach, or at least get the guy they wanted. And because of that, they were left with one choice, and that was to give Sweeney this extension. I don't think you give the guy an extension in May, a month before the draft, when he's walking into his final year. I don't think you give him an extension when Cam Neely and Jacobs several weeks ago went out there and said that Sweeney pretty much has to be successful this year to keep his job. I don't think they say that if their plan was to give him an extension several weeks later. I think this is a reactionary move because they missed on Sullivan, they missed on Tocchet, they missed on Quenneville, they missed on the top coaches that were out there. And I think they likely realized we've got to at least give Sweeney a contract extension. So even if we don't love the guy, even if he's not going to last beyond this year, at least we put something on paper. So when we go to these head coaches that we're talking to, we can tell them that Sweeney's going to be here. He just signed a contract extension. It's an easier sell to a prospective head coach. So I think that's why they did it. I'm not confident in Sweeney's ability to do the job. His offseason last year was a nightmare. You hope Elias Lindholm, he said that he injured his back pretty much at the beginning of the year. You hope that Lindholm, and he's showing some signs right now on the ice. You hope that Lindholm returns back to a guy who can give you 20, 25 goals and gives you some production at center. But yeah, I mean, I'm not confident in Sweeney. I would imagine they were interested in Sullivan. I would imagine they were really interested in Tocchet. So we'll see who the head coach ends up being. And what moves they make, because it's a huge draft. They've got the 7th pick in the draft, which was a disaster. It was the worst result they could have gotten from the draft lottery, but they have a top 10 pick. They've got a couple of 2nd-round picks. Next year's draft, they now have 2 first-round picks because the Panthers beat the Hurricanes. So the Panthers moved on. No, they didn't beat the Hurricanes. That's wrong. They beat the Leafs. So they beat the Leafs. They're moving on, which means you now get a 1st-round pick from that Marchand trade. So they've got a lot of different assets and pieces, and they've got money to spend. It's just whether or not Sweeney does a good job, and I think everybody is justifiable in wondering whether he can do the job or not now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously I'm not the biggest Bruins fan, as I said earlier, but I would love to see the Bruins back in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Hockey playoffs are one of the best playoffs in sports, especially when the Bruins are beating up on the Maple Leafs. Anyways, I have 3 more questions lined up for you, if that's all good.
Yeah, sure.
One of these 3 questions is, you've had a lot of co-hosts over the years. You got Adam Jones, you got Greg Bedard, you got a lot more than that. Out of all the co-hosts you've had throughout your career, who has been your favorite, and what has the industry of radio taught you over the past 20 or so years?
Yeah, well, my favorite co-host is probably my guy Rami that I worked with in Sacramento. It was the most fun that I've ever had doing radio. The chemistry was immediate, and I loved working with him. So I think that's probably the guy that I worked with the best. Jonesy was a different cat because he approaches things differently than I do at that
Very
time.
negative guy.
He's less negative now with Keefe. I think Keefe is his perfect partner. Keefe brings out the different side of Adam, which I know exists. I always used to tell people, like, if you met Adam off the air, you would be very surprised of who Adam Jones is, because within the world of sports, he looks at a lot of things suspiciously, and he always has skepticism when it comes to sports. But actually about life, he's a pretty optimistic guy, and he's a funny guy, and he's a fun guy to hang out with. So I always joke. I still talk to him, and I still go out and have a beer with him every once in a while, every several months if we can make it work. So I love Jonesy. I consider him one of the friends in the business that I have. He's a great dude. But his presentation and his delivery and stuff was so different than mine. I think it was a good show, and I think the ratings bore that out. It was a very successful show, but it was just it was a different way of kind of looking at things, which sometimes is good. Sometimes it turns into a battle on the air, and now you kind of lost your way and you can't get out of it. So, but I did appreciate working with Jonesy and the success that we had, and he was cool to work with, because off the air, nothing was ever personal. Like we get into battles on the air, and we go to break, and we just jump right into life and be talking about other stuff, and we never had like a personal grudge or issue ever. So he's actually, I think, one of the nicest guys in radio, and he's one of the guys in radio that I've gotten along with the best throughout my life. So a lot of respect for him, and he's crushing it with Keefe right now. Bedard it's a different thing with Bedard, because we do the podcast. It's quick. It's more me kind of setting up Greg, and Greg runs with it. It's not necessarily as much back and forth. I did a show with him. I think it was New Year's Day. We did the show together on 98.5. That was fun. I thought it was a good show. Really like working with Andrew Callahan. Did a show with him, and I thought that show was really good. Really like working with Phil Perry. I thought the show that I did with Beadle and Phil Perry on NFL Draft Day was a really good show. I thought we had fun. I thought it was informative. I thought it was good talk. So yeah, I've worked with a bunch of people, but Rami, I would say, is my guy at the top of the list through all the people that I work with.
Bit of a shameless plug right here, but Adam Jones, I actually got the opportunity to interview Adam Jones earlier this month. Great guy, very interesting, the guy to talk to. Love to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, I'll say this. When I was working nights with Jonesy, he always would take time out, and this is what I'm talking about. Like this is part of why I appreciate him a lot. I just think he's a genuinely really good dude. He always took time out for, college students, high school students. They'd reach out to him and want to talk to him. He always made time. He would always go on their podcasts. He would always, have a phone call with them. He'd have them come into the studio at times and just let them hang out. And not everybody does that. Not everybody is willing to do that. So that I'm not surprised that he was on your show. I'm not surprised he would do that because he did a lot of those things, and a lot of times it wasn't public knowledge. He did it just to kind of do it, to help the young kid out, the young guy, the young girl out. So that's just it kind of goes hand in hand with what I was talking about with Adam, where he's just a really solid dude.
Absolutely, 100% great. 100% agree. Great guy. 2 more questions before I'll let you go. Sort of a quick question right here. What advice do you have for future sportscasters, and how do you deal with negative callers / negative people on Twitter, or just like radio in general?
Look, it's part of it, right? Negativity is part of it. I could be negative at times. I think I'm a lot less negative than a number of other people in the business. I think I approach it a little bit differently than a lot of other people. Not to say that those other people do it wrong. There's more than one way to do this. And that's, part of the advice I would give to anybody that's out there. Don't believe that you've got to be Stephen A. Smith or, you've got to be Felger or Levitard, or whether you're talking nationally, locally, Jim Rome. You don't have to be those guys. You don't have to be like those guys. Follow who you are and represent yourself the way you want to represent yourself, and try to be as organic as possible and natural as possible. So, there's more than one way to deal with it. When you're talking about people with like Twitter and stuff, look, Twitter is, it's not real life. I can get into it back and forth like everybody. Every once in a while, you'll have a little back and forth with somebody, whether because you just want to, or sometimes you get baited every once in a while because you do get, a lot of messages sent your way. And every once in a while, somebody will say something and you're in a mood at that time. So you fire something back. Try not to, but it's only human. So I try to stay away from that stuff. I try to end it with like, hey, be well, man. We agree to disagree. I try to do that. Callers are callers. Like, you got to understand that when you get into this business, more advice for people who want to get into it. You're going to be loved. You're going to be hated. You're going to be liked. You're going to evoke emotion from people. They're going to disagree with you. Some things are going to disagree with you passionately. And you just try not to take it personal. Like I get as hot as anybody and had plenty of back and forths with Jonesy where my blood pressure was rising and I could throw a headset across the room. But when we were done with that sports debate, again, we would go right back to life, and it was no big deal. We both knew that it was a sports debate. As angry and frustrated as you could get about it in the moment, kind of keep the big picture. Other advice, I would just say, look, try to make as many connections as you can, network with the people. Understand that radio now is harder than it's ever been. I would look towards the podcast space. I would look towards, trying to create my own content on YouTube. I would be doing everything that I could with all the new technology, with all the new resources, with all the new opportunity. I'd be banging down that door. And if somebody in radio calls you because they've seen you do stuff, then have the conversation. But radio is very difficult. Radio nowadays, they're asking people to do a lot of jobs for less money. And it's a pretty difficult way to make a living trying to get in. So I would advise younger people to focus on their own content, focus on putting that content out in any way that they can. And maybe you don't need a radio job. Maybe within the first couple of years, you're making enough money that you can self-sustain and you can build your own thing. I think nowadays, if people asked me 5 or 10 years ago, I probably would have had a different answer. Nowadays, I think you can build your own brand. I think there's power behind, the podcast space and Spotify and the audio realm where you can get ahead of that. And so if you love radio by all means, make those connections, get an internship, try to get some part-time work on the weekends, work at a smaller station. You can do all those things, but I would also at the same time, I would simultaneously be working on my own content and getting it out there, because I think you can find success doing that maybe quicker than what might take you 5, 7, 8, 10 years to accomplish in radio.
Yeah, for sure, Nick. That's great advice right there. One thing to mention before I'll get you on to the last question. It's funny. My dad is a huge hater of Felger and Maz. He wants to call in all the time. To do like debate Felger. It's pretty funny. That's kind of the reason why I asked that question. Anyways, my last question for you today is, as a native Rhode Islander, every now and then I'll go to Providence with some of my friends or just some of my family who's from Rhode Island. What is your thoughts on the Providence Place Mall? Is it overrated, underrated? I always tell people it's like the most overrated mall of all time. What do you think, though?
I have not been to the Providence Place Mall in decades. I can't tell you the last time I literally walked into that mall. I'm not a big mall guy, Will. I honestly couldn't tell you the last time I went to the Providence Place Mall. I don't know what it looks like anymore inside. I drive by it. I've gone to bars near it. I've certainly gone to the old Providence Civic Center, which has been renamed 55 times. I think it's now the Amica Pavilion. But Providence Place Mall, I'm not a big mall guy. I know when I went in there, when it was first built eons ago, it was a big deal. And it was a big deal for a reason, because it was a huge mall and it was something different. And Rhode Island was different at the time. And that was when, Rhode Island was kind of being built out. And I think now that it's aged and there's a lot of other sexier things in bigger cities, it's just the mall, man. It's just the mall. But when it first was built, and it was a pretty big deal. But I can't tell you. I can't tell. So I'd say nowadays it's overrated, if it's even rated. I'd say when it was first built, it was probably properly rated, because it was a big deal, especially for the city. But for me, I honestly couldn't care less.
Wow, I feel like that's like the main part of Providence, at least in my opinion.
Sure it is.
Providence, but I kind of like Providence. Between that, the Dunkin' Donuts Center, and like the fucking what's it called, Uncle Tony's. It's a pretty good city in my opinion. But
it's a good city. It's a good city. It's just, again, not a mall guy, and you're seeing Providence after it's built out. So that was like one of the first bigger things that it's like, oh, okay. Now, I mean, I'm going to sound like the old guy and stuff, but when I was younger, we would go to like Warwick Mall and, Emerald Square Mall. Those were the malls that I would go to. Lincoln Mall, which was quite the mall. The Providence Place Mall compared to those malls. So if you were ranking malls, Will, I think the Lincoln Mall would be at the very bottom of the list. And then you had like the Warwick Mall was like level 2. And then Emerald Square was like level 3. And Emerald Square was like the best mall of all time for me when I was growing up. So when the Providence Place Mall was built, it was like Mall of America in Minnesota was being built. It was like, Providence is going to have an actual legit mall with like premium outlets and all that stuff. When we were growing up, like that wasn't the case. You were going to some awful malls. So Providence Place Mall is a top tier mall compared to all the other malls. But for a non-mall guy, not that big of a deal to me.
It's just that Nick Howes does not care about the Providence Place Mall. It's like being a native Rhode Islander. Anyways, though, Nick, thank you for coming on today's podcast. And thank you for coming on.
Keep doing what you're doing, Will. I appreciate it, man. Be well.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day. And we'll see you next time on the Will Santos